You had an interesting life experience. I wish you would share that with people because I think we have different points in our lives that are moments where we come to a precipice and we have to make decisions that become life altering. And you talk about a time in your final years of high school when you say you were being bullied and some classmates, it just infuriates me to even think about this, but they snuck onto your property and shot your beagle, Paula. And the police didn't do anything. Talk about your experience when that happened, because I think that set you on this path.
Oh, there's no doubt that it did, in fact, set me on this path. It changed my life. I had two really big pivot points in my life, and that was the first one, Dr. Phil. Uh, and just as you said, I had been being harassed and bullied for several years through high school. And by the time I grew up in the country in central Pennsylvania on a farm, and by the time I mean, these kids were essentially my neighbors, other farm kids out in the country, but I wasn't a legitimate farm kid in the sense that my dad was an insurance agent. We lived on my great grandfather's farm, so I wasn't accepted into the in group there. And I desperately wanted to be part of that in group. I wanted to be a farmer. That's my number one career goal when I was in high school, was to be a farmer, until I was so firmly rejected by these guys, which was a painful experience. But it culminated one night while we were all home asleep in this, along this one lane country road, just sort of half awake, and I hear a pickup truck coming down the road and stopping in front of our house, which is an unusual act in its own right, but it was enough to just grab my attention. And I looked out the window and I could see it was one of their trucks. And moments later, there was a gunshot. Uh, this woke everyone up. The person that fired the gun ran back, got in the truck, and they took off down the road. We looked around the house to see if there was any damage, bullet holes, anybody was hurt. No, but no one was hurt. Went back to bed eventually. One of my jobs on our farm, it was a pretty small operation in terms, because we weren't making our living from it. So we had a herd of Angus cattle and some hogs and chickens. And one of my jobs before going into school in the morning and getting on that bus was to go out and feed the animals and water them and take care of our dog, our hunting dog, Paula, the beagle. And when I went up to her pen, I found her laying dead in a pool of blood with a bullet hole in her head, which was just the most, as you can imagine, the most shocking experience to imagine. I mean, obviously, humans experience far worse violence than that, human on human violence, and terrible things occur. But when you're living in the country and you walk upon something like that, it shakes you. And I can tell you now, in hindsight, as a researcher, that exploded in my mind a desire to retaliate against these guys. I wanted justice, and I wanted it absolutely desperately, and nothing was going to stop me from getting it. Well, my parents called the state police. They came. These were in the days of things like this, and bullying and stuff between kids didn't really matter very much, not at that level. And this was well before school shootings had ever occurred. And it was ignored. And 2 weeks later, I was home by myself again, but pretty late at night. And they came back. The pickup truck came. And there was, I looked out the window after an enormous, for me, explosion, where they had blew our mailbox off its post, with like a half stick of dynamite. Crazy stuff. I mean, just, you wonder why, right?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, that was it for me. And my justice craving was now unleashed. And, I'd grown up with guns all my life. We had plenty of hunting weapons in our house, and my dad had a handgun in his nightstand, and I grabbed it and I ran out the door, and I took off after these guys. Took me a good bit of time to catch up to them. I was probably hitting nearly 100 miles an hour on this country road. And I chased them onto one of their farms, and I cornered them by a barn. And, I had my high beams on them. And there were three of them, three heads in the rear window of a pickup truck. And they got out and just sort of stared back at me, dumbfounded like deer, kind of, who's this? Because it took me a while, so they wouldn't necessarily know who it was. They had no weapon. They didn't know I had one. And it was my opportunity to get justice. And I reached down and I grabbed that gun and I unlocked the door and I started opening it. And thank God at the very last second, I just had this sort of illumined moment, this sudden awakening that if I killed those three guys, and it would have been so easy, I'd have killed me, the guy that I knew I was for those 17 years. And I'd never come back from that. And I might be killed physically. I sure would be killed in my identity and my personality. I'd never be the same. I would be a murderer the rest of my life. And it was just enough of an insight to cause me to put the gun back down on that passenger seat and close the door and drive home. And that's when I decided to become a lawyer. Because, lawyers get justice for free, Dr. Phil, in America, or we think we do. We get justice without paying for it, or that's the message. And, we can go from there, but that's my little journey at that point.
What do you think caused you to take that pause when you did? Because it can be 2 seconds between opening that car door and pulling that trigger. A lot had to happen in that few seconds.
I'm a spiritual guy. I was raised, my grandfather was a Brethren pastor, and I was raised. It wasn't even raised. I've always felt like I had a pretty close relationship with the divine, and for me, I felt like that was a divine moment, an intervening moment. I'm not saying that God intervened and saved my life, but I'm saying that my spiritual connection to God was reawakened at that moment, at the last second. And I can't explain exactly what caused that awakening, other than to say that all of my years I was raised in a good family. I was raised with a lot of advantages. I didn't have a lot of want. I didn't see a lot of violence. Violence wasn't who my family were, or my teachers. And those things, I think, helped support me in that crisis moment and helped be available. They were available for me to draw upon, at that last second. I often think about, there's a fellow that I work, actually there's several murderers, incarcerated that I work with, and they all seem like the other James Kimmel to me. Some of them are my age right now, and they've been serving 50-year sentences plus. And they had almost identical experiences. They didn't have a dog shot, but they had some other heavy grievance that they had experienced, some form of victimization that was completely shattering for them. And at the last second, they didn't have that illumination. And it is boggling to me, and it's tragic to me, that so many people don't have those built-in resources, whatever they are, or that sense of spirituality that's critical, to be able to stop. But I'll say even people that have all those resources, they sometimes go right through the red light and they commit that act of violence. And that's why, the new book that I'm writing, which is called The Justice Addicted Brain, The Surprising Science for How Good People Turn Deadly. That's kind of my message, is that people think of murderers typically as sociopaths, psychopaths, people with broken brains, people that are demented, filled with evilness. It's rarely the case, actually. That's true. There is a group of people who have sociopathology that's diagnosable, and if you study their brains are different from the rest of us. But that represents 1% to 3% of the population. Most of the violence is not being perpetrated by sociopaths in our world. It's being perpetrated by good people who have a grievance and get caught up in this addictive process. And by the time they've gratified this craving for revenge, and you get high from it. If I would have pulled the trigger, I'd have been as high as a kite for minutes to maybe even an hour after. But after that, I'd have crashed hard the way all drug addicts do. And I would have been left hurting even more than I was before, and yet somehow wanting more of this drug over and over again. It's the most powerful and dangerous addiction in humanity, far more dangerous than drug addiction, because the only way to get high for a justice addict is to inflict suffering upon somebody else. You know, a justice addict uses a gun to inject a bullet. A drug addict uses a syringe to inject a drug. You know, but in the end, these are two processes of making yourself feel better when you're hurt.